The Duke of Rathmell struck the cottage door with the flat of his hand hard enough to rattle the latch off its keeper, and a woman's voice on the other side said, quite calmly, "If you break my door you will let the cold in on him, and he has only just stopped shivering." Gideon stood in the rain with his whip in his fist, and 11 days of sleeplessness behind his eyes, and could not for a moment make the sentence mean anything. Then it meant everything. "Open this door." "I am opening it. You are leaning on it." He stepped back. The latch lifted. The door came in on a low room lit by one rush candle and a peat fire, and the smell that came out was tallow, honey, and the sharp green bite of some steeped herb. And on a bed of sacking and old blanket by the hearth lay a great rough-coated gray deerhound with its head in a young woman's lap, and its ribs going up and down. Roke's tail moved. Twice. It was the sound of a tail on sacking, and the Duke of Rathmell, who had not wept when they buried his wife, had to put his hand on the doorframe. "You have him." "I have him," the woman said. 11 days. Shut the door, please, your grace, and do not shout, because he is afraid of shouting now, which he was not before." She did not get up. She could not. The dog's head was on her knee, and one gray forepaw, splinted between 2 lengths of split hazel and bound round and round with linen, lay across her forearm as though he had put it there himself. The linen was clean. Everything in the room was clean, and everything in the room was poor. A table, 2 stools, a shelf of jars, a dresser with 4 plates, a beam hung with drying bunches. 2 straw hives stood in the wet garden outside like sentries. Gideon shut the door. "How did he come to you?" "He did not come to me. I found him." She spoke to the fire, one hand moving slowly on the hound's neck, over and over, the way one keeps a heartbeat company. On the chase, above the beech hanger, in a spring trap set in the run by the little brook, a gin. He had been in it a night and the best part of a day. "That is my land." "Yes." "You were poaching on it." "I was going to Cadwell by the ridge path because the low road floods, as it has flooded every march of my life, and your grace's tenants have petitioned him twice about it." She lifted her eyes at last, and they were the color of wet slate, and they were not frightened, which was so unusual that it took him a moment to be angry about it. He had stopped crying by the time I came. That is why nobody found him sooner. They cry the first hours, and then they lie down and are quiet. Gideon crossed the room in 2 strides, and went down on one knee on the flags. Close, the dog was a ruin of himself. Hip bones like a gate, coat gone dull, the long noble head too heavy to lift. But the black eye rolled and found him, and the tail went again, and a tremor ran the whole length of the animal that was not fear. "Softly," the woman said. "Do not take the leg, it is knitting." "Will it knit?" "It has begun. He will keep the foot, and he will keep the leg, and he will be lame in it always, and he will not care in the least, being a dog." A pause. "The first 3 nights I did not think he would keep his life. He would not drink. I put milk and honey into him with a quill, drop upon drop, and he swallowed on the 4th hour, and after that he wanted to live, and it was only a question of whether the leg would let him." Gideon put out his hand and laid it on the great skull, and the hound leaned into it with a groan of such uncomplicated relief that the room seemed to tilt. "His name is Roke," he said, and did not recognize his own voice. "I know. He told me on the 2nd day, when the fever took him and he began to answer to things." She said it without any smile at all, which somehow made it worse. "I said a great many names to him. He answered to that one." "Why did you not send word to the house?" The hand on the hound's neck did not stop moving, but everything else in her went still, and Gideon understood, with the slow, cold clarity of a man watching a stone drop down a well, that he had asked the one question in the room with a floor under it. "Your Grace," she said, "I am Verity Lound of this cottage. On 3 acres my father held freehold, and everyone in the parish wishes he had not. I am 26, and I live alone but for Dorcas, who is deaf and asleep in the loft. They call me the beast leech at Cadwell and worse than that at Nether Rathmell, because I set bones and draw thorns and know what to do with a mare that is down, and because I do not go to the alehouse, and I do not marry. Now, I found the Duke of Rathmell's own hound in an illegal gin on the Duke of Rathmell's own land, with the Duke of Rathmell's gamekeeper's mark cut in the stake." Her chin came up. "If I had carried that news to the great house, whose word would have been believed, and what would have become of me?" The rain came down on the thatch. The fire spat once. "Mine," said Gideon at last, "mine would have been believed, and I do not know what would have become of you, and that is the answer that shames me." Verity Lound blinked. It was the first thing all evening that had surprised her. "So I did the other thing," she said. "I bound the leg on the hill with my apron and my garters, and I went down to Coley's and borrowed a sledge and a mattock handle for a lever, and I brought him 2 miles on the sledge in the dark, and I have fed him on milk I ought to have sold and eggs I ought to have sold, and the neck of a hare that was legally snared on my own 3 acres, Your Grace, and I would swear to that before the bench. And every day for 11 days I have known that the Duke of Rathmell's men were riding the country calling a name, and every day I have thought, tomorrow he will be strong enough to be seen, and then I shall go. He was strong enough this morning." She looked down at the dog. "You came tonight instead." Gideon looked at the splint. It was beautifully done. 2 hazel splits, padded with fleece, the linen laid in overlapping turns as neat as a fair copy, the whole thing dressed with something that smelled of comfrey and honey and had not been allowed to sour. 11 days. He had spent them shouting at 40 men. She had spent them on this floor with a quill and a jug of milk. "Miss Lound," he said, "look at me." She looked. He turned his face a little into the candlelight so that she should have the whole of it. The burned scar that ran from his left temple down into his jaw, dragging the outer corner of the eye, 8 years old, and still the first thing anyone in the county thought of when they heard his name. He had done it deliberately for 8 years. It saved time. "You know what they say of me. They say the Duke of Rathmell killed his wife on the Kelding Road and bought the coroner." Verity Lound did not look away. "They say he came out of the burning carriage and left her in it. They say he has not been to church since, and that there is a room at the hall nobody enters, and that he shot a man in Flanders for cheating and did not wait for the seconds. They say when he rides through Cadwell the pigeons go up. And I have a hound of yours on my knee who was starved half to death by your keeper's gin, and who wept for joy when you came through that door," she said. "Your Grace, I trust dogs. It is the whole of my education." Gideon of Rathmell knelt on a poor woman's floor with his hand on his dead wife's dog, and found that he could not speak at all. He came back the next morning at 8, and the morning after that. The reason was unanswerable, and he was glad of it. The hound could not be moved. 4 miles in a cart on that leg, said Verity Lound, and you may carry him the last mile in a sack, and she said it to a duke in her own doorway with her sleeves rolled. So Roke lay by a peat fire in a cottage on 3 acres, and the master of 11,000 sat on a stool the height of a milking stool with his hat on his knee, and the whole of Nether Rathmell talked of nothing else. He learned the cottage in a week. He learned that the shelf of jars was labeled in a small even-hand mallow, comfrey, tar, oil of hyssop, alum, and that the labels were written on the backs of playing cards because paper cost money. He learned that Dorcas Pite was 71 and deaf as the hearthstone, and had been his own grandmother's dairymaid. and that when she recognized him, she curtsied so low they had to help her up, and thereafter treated him as an object of no interest whatever. He learned that Verity Lound worked from dark to dark. Hives, hens, a goat, a garden, and on top of that, the whole animal trade of the parish. In the 8 mornings he sat on that stool she was called out to a cow that would not clean, a mare with a quitter, a lurcher run over by a wagon, and a farmer's daughter's tame jackdaw. And she went to every one of them, and was paid in eggs, in a cabbage, in nothing, and in a promise. "They will not have me for their children," she said, packing her satchel. "For their beasts they will have me at midnight in the rain. It is not unreasonable. A cow is worth 11 pounds. What are you paid for a cow? A shilling, or the loan of the cart at Hazel, or the word of God, according to the man." She pulled the strap. "Your Grace is welcome to sit with him. He does better when there is someone breathing in the room." And she was gone up the lane in a man's oilskin with her hood up, and Gideon sat in a poor room with a lame dog's head on his boot, and became aware that, for the first time in 8 years, he was somewhere that did not know it was supposed to be afraid of him. On the 9th morning, he brought a hamper from the hall dairy, and she would not have it. "Butter, cream, a ham, and 2 dozen eggs," said Verity Lound, standing in her doorway with her arms folded. "Your Grace, if that goes over my threshold, then by Sunday it will be all round Nether Rathmell what I am paid in, and by what, and for what." Gideon looked at the hamper. He had carried it in himself, which had scandalized his footman past speech. "He is my dog," he said. "He is eating your winter." "Then send it to the dog." "That," said the Duke of Rathmell, "is the most transparent piece of sophistry I have ever been offered, and I accept it." So the hamper came in labeled, in the small even hand off the backs of the playing cards, for the Hound, and Verity Lound ate none of the ham for 4 days out of principle, and then ate it out of hunger, and told him so, which was the moment he began to understand what her particular courage was made of. She would not be given anything she could not afterwards look at squarely. He learned other things in that fortnight, sitting on a stool too low for him with a lame dog's chin on his boot. He learned that, when a woman in Cadwell passed her in the lane, the woman looked at the hedge. He learned that the curate would not baptize at Nether Rathmell while she stood in the church, having said once from the pulpit that a person who healed by simples was trafficking with something, and that Verity had thereafter stopped going, and missed it, and did not say so more than once. He learned that she had been asked to marry twice, at 19 by a Kelding grazier who wanted the 3 acres, and at 24 by a widowed cooper who wanted a nurse for his mother, and had said as much honestly, and had been thanked for the honesty and refused. "You have never been asked by anyone who wanted you," Gideon said. Verity Lound looked up from the linen she was rolling. "No," she said, "but I have been sent for at midnight by half a parish, your Grace, and there are worse ways to be needed, and I have made it do." He rode home along the ridge in a white spring fog, and found that he was angry all the way, and not with her, and not with the cooper, and not even with Vasey, whom he still believed at that hour to be an honest man. The stake out of the beech hanger stood on the table in the steward's room at Rathmell Hall, with the gin still on its chain, and Gideon walked round it twice before he spoke. "Mr. Halbeck, how many gins are set on this estate?" His steward's eyes went to the gamekeeper and came back. "None, your Grace, by your own order since the Michaelmas before last. Wire and nets only, and no engine that will hold a man." "Then explain this." Vasey had been keeper at Rathmell for 19 years, and had the flat, patient face of a man who had explained a great many things. "Poacher's work, your Grace. They set 'em and blame us. There's a Cadwell gang been at the chase all winter, and I'd name one of 'em to your face if you asked me." "Name her, you mean?" "Your Grace said it, not me." "The stake carries your mark," Gideon said. 3 notches and a cross. It is the mark on every post and hurdle in your charge, and it is cut into the handle of the mattock in your own shed. A Cadwell poacher who marks his gins with the keeper's private mark is a subtle man. Where does the venison go, Vasey?" The flat face did not change, but something behind it sat down. "I don't take your Grace's meaning." "Halbeck," said Gideon, "the game book and the Cadwell carrier's book, and the accounts of the Rathmell arms for 2 years. Send Pert to fetch them tonight and do not tell him why." He turned. 11 days, Vasey. My hound was 11 days in the wet with his leg in your engine, and you rode out with me twice a day calling his name across ground you knew he was lying under. Do not speak. Go and stand in the passage. It took 9 days, and it was not subtle at all. 14 gins had been set in the runs along the beach hanger and the Ladythorn covert. In ground the Duke never walked, because the Duke never walked anywhere but the ridge. And the venison had gone out by the Cadwell carrier, as salt beef in a beer barrel, 41 times in 2 years. And the Rathmell arms had paid for it in coin. And Vasey had a second cottage at Kelding with a slate roof on it. Gideon dismissed him on a Tuesday, with the constable in the room and a written account of every barrel, and did not prosecute, which everyone at the hall thought merciful, and which was in fact the single worst error of judgment of his life. "Why not?" said Verity Lound. She was sitting on the flags with Rokes splint across her knee, unwinding the linen turn by turn to look at what was under it, and Gideon was on the milking stool with his hat on the floor. And outside the March light was lengthening at last, and one of the hives had begun to hum. "Because 19 years is 19 years, he said, "and because the man has a wife, and because I have found that I have very little appetite for destroying people. Look at the leg and tell me." She looked. Her hands went over it featherlight, one finger following the bone. "It is knit," she said, "crooked. There is a knuckle of new bone there the size of a hazelnut, and it will never be otherwise. Roke, my dear, you are a lame dog." She rewound the linen with 3 turns instead of 10. "Another fortnight of the splint and then he may go home." Gideon looked at the fire for a while. "Miss Lound, may a man tell you something he has not told anyone?" The hands went on working, unhurried. "Dorcas is asleep, and I am not a gossip. It is why the parish uses me and does not like me. On the Kelding Road 8 years ago I was driving my wife home from her father's house at 2 in the morning in a hired chaise because our own had thrown a linchpin, and I was driving too fast because we had quarreled, and the quarrel was about nothing, about a house in town, about whether we should winter in it." His voice was quite level. It had taken 8 years to get it level. There was a stone wagon at the turn with no lamp. The pole went into it. The lamp oil went over the boot, and the boot took fire, and Allie's was caught by the skirt where the door had sprung, and I could not. He stopped. Roke's tail moved on the sacking. "I got her out," Gideon said. "I got her out, and she lived 9 days, and she was conscious for 6 of them, and she forgave me on the second twice, and I have never once been able to accept it. They say I left her in the carriage. I have never corrected it. It seemed a small enough penance, and it kept people at a distance, which by then was all I wanted." He turned his hand over and looked at it. "She had this dog off a Kelding drover as a starving whelp the week we married. He slept on her bed the 9 days. He was in the room when she died, and he would not leave it, and for 2 years he would not eat unless I sat with him, and I have not Miss Lound. I have not spoken to a living soul about my wife in 8 years. But I have talked to that animal about her every night since, like a madman, and he is the only creature on this earth who knows what her voice sounded like. The room was very quiet. The hive hummed outside. "And 11 days ago he vanished," Verity said. "And 11 days ago he vanished, and I understood that when he died the last of her would go out like a lamp, and I rode this county until my horses foundered, and I came to your door prepared to break it down." He looked up, and found him splinted, and clean, and fat with your milk, and alive, and a woman on the floor keeping his heart company with her hand. Do you understand now why I could not put a price on it? Verity Lound had stopped working. She was looking at him with those wet slate eyes, and there was color high on her cheeks, and when she spoke her voice was not quite as steady as it usually was. "I understand that your Grace has offered me £40 3 times, and I have refused it 3 times, and that he has never once asked me why." "Why?" "Because the moment I take money for that dog," she said, "I am the woman who was paid for the dog. And because," she looked down at Roke's gray head, "because for 11 days I had something in this house that would die if I stopped, and nobody in this parish has ever needed me like that, and your Grace cannot pay me for it, because I was the one who was given something." Gideon of Rathmell sat on a milking stool and looked at her, and did not touch her, and understood with perfect clarity that he was in love, and that it had happened somewhere between the quill and the honey and the words be lame in it always, and that he had nothing whatever to offer her that would not be an insult. "Then let me give you something that is not money," he said. "The low road floods every March. Your father petitioned about it, and my father's steward buried the paper. I have read it. Miss Lound, I am going to raise that road." She began to laugh, and then she put her hand over her mouth, and her eyes were wet, and it was the first time he had ever seen her lose hold of anything. "Your Grace," she said, "if you raise that road, every soul between here and Cadwell will forgive me for being a witch." They did not forgive her. They had the road, and they took it as their right, and Vasey had 9 days at the Rathmell Arms with nothing to do but drink and be pitied, and on the 10th the stones came. Gideon had it from Dorcas Pite, who had woken because the goat screamed. 4 men in the dark, and both straw hives kicked flat, and the garden trodden, and the loft window broken with a stone the size of a fist, and a word cut into her door with a knife. The men were gone before Verity got downstairs with the poker, and she had not seen a face, and she would not name one. He rode down at first light, and found her in the wreck of the garden, in a shawl, with a burnt turf smoldering in a pan to quiet the bees she had left, kneeling in the mud righting a hive with her bare hands. Half the swarm was dead of the cold. She did not say so. She said, "They will settle by noon if I get the crown board on," and her voice did not shake, and her hands were shaking so much she could not hold the board. Gideon took it out of her hands and held it while she said it, and then he stood up in the middle of her ruined garden and looked at the word on her door. "Miss Lound," he said, "I am going to ask you a question, and I want you to weigh it against the fact that a man who is protected is also a man who is exposed." But he never asked it that morning, because a boy came up the lane with a paper. An information had been sworn before Sir Ossian Prees, magistrate at Kelding, by Thomas Vasey, late gamekeeper of the Rathmell estate. That Verity Lound, spinster of Nether Rathmell, had on divers nights entered the chase with engines, had set gins therein for the taking of the Duke's deer, and had by the said engines maimed his Grace's own hound, and thereafter concealed the animal in her dwelling. And further, that being a woman of ill repute in the parish and much resorted to for charms, she had wrought upon his Grace's understanding by arts, he having been seen daily at her door, and having thereafter dismissed a servant of 19 years upon her word alone. Verity Lound read it twice, standing in the mud in her shawl among the dead bees. Then she said, in a perfectly ordinary voice, "The first part is transportation, your grace. The second part is only ruin." She folded the paper along its old fold. "Sir Ossian Prees is the gentleman who pays for the barrels at the Rathmell Arms, is he not?" He was the gentleman who paid for the barrels at the Rathmell Arms. He had paid for 11 of them, at 3 shillings the pound, and his own housekeeper had entered every one in the Kelding kitchen book in a hand as clear as a copperplate, because no one in a magistrate's kitchen had ever imagined a duke would read it. Gideon rode to Kelding that afternoon, and did not go to the front of the house. "Sir Ossian," he said, when they were alone in a library that smelled of dog and port, "you will hear this information on Thursday in the market hall at Cadwell in public, with the doors open, and you will hear it beside 2 other gentlemen of the bench whom I shall name, and you will not decide 1 syllable of it yourself. Or you will withdraw from it altogether on grounds of interest, which the county will interpret at its leisure. I have your housekeeper's book. I have not shown it to anyone. Choose." Sir Ossian Prees, who was 60 and stout, and had never in his life been frightened at close quarters, chose the market hall. "Rathmell," he said thickly, at the door, "you are throwing away the whole of your consequence over a bee-woman." "No," said the Duke of Rathmell, "I am spending it. It is the first use I have ever found for it." The market hall at Cadwell held 200, and there were 400, and they were in the doorways and on the outside stairs, and standing on the mounting block at the window, because in 19 years nothing had happened in that parish at all. Verity Lound stood where she was told to stand, in her gray Sunday gown with her hair pinned hard, and she had refused an attorney because she could not pay for one, and would not have one paid for. Vasey swore his information. He swore it well. He had 19 years of the estate in his mouth, and he used all of it, the gang at Cadwell, the woman who went about the country at midnight, the charms, the jackdaw, the goat, the Duke seen daily at a poor cottage door, and a servant of 19 years turned off in an hour. There was a sound in the hall while he spoke, a low sound, and Gideon knew it for what it was. The sound of 200 people who had used her at midnight in the rain, and had never once liked her, discovering that they need not. Then the bench called the Duke of Rathmell, and Gideon walked to the front of the hall and turned round, and let 400 people look at his face. "I shall be brief, and I shall be particular," he said, "and I ask the bench to take every word of it down. First, 14 gins were lifted from the chase in March by my steward, my carpenter, and the constable of Nether Rathmell, all 3 of whom are here. Every stake bore 3 notches and a cross, which is the private mark of the keeper of Rathmell, cut on every hurdle in his charge these 19 years. Here is the mattock from his shed. Here is the mark. Let them be handed up. Second, the Cadwell Carrier's book shows 41 barrels of salt beef out of this parish in 2 years, consigned by Thomas Vasey and paid for at the Rathmell Arms, and the Rathmell Arms sold no salt beef, gentlemen, it sold venison, and every man in this hall who ate it knows what he was eating. Let the books be handed up. Third, he turned to look at the constable's table, where the stake and the chain lay. On the 11th of March, my hound went into one of those gins in the run above the beach hanger, on my land, in ground I never walk, and lay there a night and the best part of a day. He was found by Miss Lound of Nether Rathmell as she went over the ridge to Cadwell, the low road being under water, as it has been under water every March in living memory, which is a matter I shall come back to. She bound the leg on the hill with her own apron and her own garters. She went half a mile downhill to Coley's farm and borrowed a sledge, and Coley is in this hall and will say so. She brought a 9-stone dog 2 miles in the dark on that sledge, alone. She kept him 11 days on milk she should have sold and eggs she should have sold, and she fed him with a quill drop by drop for 4 days because he could not drink, and she set that leg so that a lame dog walks on it today. And when I came to her door in a rage at 11 at night, she told me to my face that she had not brought me the news because the stake carried my own keeper's mark, and she asked me whose word would be believed, and what would become of her. Gideon paused. Gentlemen, I could not answer her. I cannot answer her now. That is the county we have made. Fourth and last, it is sworn here that she wrought upon my understanding by arts. He let that stand in the silence a moment. The arts were these: honey, comfrey, hazel, linen, and 11 days of her own sleep. I have offered her £40 3 times. She has refused it 3 times, and she stands here today without an attorney because she will not be paid for and will not be bought. And if the bench requires evidence of witchcraft, that is the only unnatural thing I have met in this parish in 8 years. The bench conferred. It did not take long. Then somebody at the back of the hall said, "Oh," in a strange voice, and 400 people turned round. Pert had brought the hound in a cart to the foot of the outside stairs, on the Duke's order, to be shown if the bench should ask it. Nobody had asked. Roke had got himself off the cart, which nobody afterwards would admit to having allowed, and had come up the stone stairs one at a time, and through the legs at the door and into the hall. He came the whole length of it. He came slowly, because a great crooked knuckle of new bone in a foreleg makes a dog nod at every stride, and the crowd opened for him as it had never once opened for her. And he went past the constable's table, and past the bench, and past the Duke of Rathmell without so much as a look, and he put his head into Verity Lowndes' hands, and leaned the whole weight of himself against her knees, and stood there. In the silence you could hear her breathing. "Take it down," said Gideon without turning round. "Take down what the animal did." Sir Ossian Prees dismissed the information as vexatious, malicious, and unsupported. Thomas Vasey was committed to the sessions for perjury, and for theft of venison to the value of £190, and was afterwards transported for 7 years, which was the sentence he had asked the bench to give a woman for a hare. 3 men of Cadwell who had kicked flat 2 straw hives in the dark were fined by their own neighbours' evidence, the parish having discovered overnight that it had always been on her side. And Sir Ossian at the door to the Duke, quietly, "You might have hanged me with that kitchen book, Rathmell." "I might," said Gideon. "You have 400 witnesses that I did not. Raise the low road with me. Half the cost apiece, and your name on it, and let the county talk about that instead." They raised the road that summer. 900 loads of stone, and a culvert with a stone arch, and it does not flood. He asked her on an evening in June, in the wreck of a garden that was no longer a wreck, with 4 hives on the south side of it, and one of them, a new swarm she had taken out of a chimney at Kelding for nothing. "Miss Lowndes, in March I began a question, and a boy came up the lane with a paper. May a man finish it?" She was standing with a smoker in her hand, and a veil pushed back off her face, and she went very still, exactly the way she had gone still on the first night. "Your Grace has finished a great many things this spring. This one is not mine to finish." He took his hat off. He had done it every time he crossed her threshold since March, and she had never once remarked on it. "Verity, I am 38. I have a burned face, a house with a room in it that nobody enters, a dead wife I loved and failed, a lame dog, and 11,000 acres of a county that has been afraid of me for 8 years, and will now be curious about me instead, which is worse. I have nothing to offer you that is not also a burden. But I have not been alone in a room since March, and I did not know until March that I had been alone in one for 8 years, and I find that I would rather sit on a milking stool in your kitchen than at the head of my own table, and I am not able to go on sitting there as a visitor. Will you marry me?" She did not answer at once. She set the smoker down on the wall carefully, the way she did everything. "They will say I caught you with a dog," she said. "They will. I have thought about it a great deal and there is no answer to it, and I will not insult you by pretending there is. What I can tell you is what I shall do about it. I shall not hide you and I shall not display you. I shall tell the plain truth to anyone who asks, and to a good many who do not, exactly as I told it in the market hall, and the plain truth is that you did the whole of it before you knew my name was worth anything to you, and that you refused £40 3 times." He paused. "And there is one thing more, and it is the only thing I am proud of in the whole business. Whatever you answer, the road is raised and it stays raised. You have not to buy it. It was never the price of anything." Verity Lound put both hands over her face, as she had done on the flags in March, and when she took them away she was laughing and her eyes were streaming. "Gideon," she said, and it was the first time, and he felt it go through him like the sun coming out. "I have been terrified of that question since May, and the whole of my terror was that you would not ask it." He took her hand. He did not do anything else, standing in a garden in June with 4 hives murmuring behind them, and it was some considerable time before either of them thought of the house. They were married in September at Nether Rathmell, and Dorcas Pite sat in the front pew in a new gown, and heard not one word of it, and cried the whole way through. The Duchess of Rathmell kept her bees. 9 hives went up along the sheltered south wall of the kitchen garden that first spring, and then 14, and the honey went to the Cadwell market like anyone's, and she went out at midnight in a man's oilskin to cows that would not clean and mares that were down, in the Duke's own gig now, with the Duke's own lantern, and the Duke of Rathmell more often than not on the seat beside her holding the horse, because he had discovered late in life that he was fit for something. The room at the hall that nobody entered was opened in October. Allie's portrait hangs at the turn of the stairs where the morning light finds it, and it was Verity who had it moved there, and she says good morning to it as she passes, which Gideon has never been able to speak about without his voice failing. And on the hearthrug in the long library at Rathmell, in front of the best fire in the house, a great gray deerhound with a crooked foreleg sleeps out his old age between 2 chairs that have been drawn a little closer together than the room requires. He nods when he walks. He does not mind in the least being a dog. Some nights when the house is quiet, the Duke of Rathmell still leans down and puts his hand on the great gray skull and tells him things. But not often now. Now there is someone in the chair beside him who answers.